Hey gang, and welcome back. Just a reminder, you can now use the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, at flipsidegaming.com. You'll get 10% off orders over $10 and help with the channel at the same time. This week, we're back with another group of monocolored commanders. For this game, I'm playing MTG Ducky's Krenko deck, and I keep a hand with 4 mountains, Ashleen's Prerogative, Faithless Looting, and Goblin King. Jason is playing his Ezuri deck and keeps a hand with Dryad Arbor, Fauna Shaman, Windswept Heath, Jiraga Tree Speaker, Well-Wisher, Fintorn Elves, and Wirewood Lodge. Eric is playing his Sakashima the Imposter clone deck, and he keeps a hand with Clever Impersonator, Think Twice, Cryptic Command, Empress Galena, 2 Islands, and Treasure Cruise. Lastly, Pat is playing his Sram deck, and he keeps a hand with 2 Plains, Skullclamp, Sram's Expertise, Wrath of God, Accorder's Shield, and Steelshaper's Gift. I win the die roll and start us off. For the first turn of the game, I play a mountain and pass to Pat. Pat plays a Plains and drops Skullclamp before passing to Eric. For Eric's turn, he plays an island and passes to Jason. Jason plays a Windswept Heath and cracks it, taking 1 to find a forest. He then casts Fintorn Elves and passes turn. Having gone around the table once, I play a mountain and cast Goblin Bombardment. Pat plays a Plains and casts Sram, then plays Accorder's Shield, which lets him draw a card. Pat then plays Bonesaw and draws another card before passing to Eric. Eric plays an island and passes to Jason. Jason plays a forest and casts Jiraga Tree Speaker before passing turn. For my turn, I play a mountain and cast Goblin King, then pass to Pat. For Pat's turn, he plays a Plains and casts Steelshaper's Gift, which lets him go find Sword of the Animus from his library. He then casts the sword and draws a card before passing to Eric. Eric plays an island and casts Jace Beleren. He then upticks his walker, letting everyone draw a card and binds some good karma with the table. With nothing else, he passes to Jason. Jason plays Wirewood Lodge for his land drop, and then levels up Jiraga Tree Speaker. He then taps the Tree Speaker, and using 1 mana to untap it with Lodge, retaps it, floating 3 green mana. He plays Fauna Shaman and Well-Wisher before passing to me. For my turn, I play a mountain and cast Beetleback Chief, increasing my goblin count by 3. Moving to combat, I boldly swing my king at Jason, and he opts to not block and takes 2. With nothing else, I pass to Pat. For Pat's turn, he plays Sigarda's Aid and equips a sword into Sram. Moving to combat, he swings Sram at Jason for 3 and gets to find a Plains. With nothing else, he passes to Eric. Eric plays an island, then down ticks Jace because he doesn't like making friends, and at the end of his turn, he's forced to discard down to 7 during his cleanup phase. Jason's turn is over pretty quickly. He then moves to cast his commander, Ezuri Renegade Leader, and Eric lets the elf resolve before Jason passes turn. For my turn, big surprise, I play a mountain and cast Hordling Outburst. I then cast Faithless Looting, as I've drawn almost exclusively lands, and pitch a Mountain and Star Compass. Moving to combat, I decide that if Eric won't share, he can't have any toys, so I swing 2 goblins at Jace and 1 at Pat. For Pat's turn, he casts Pearl Medallion and equips Skullclamp onto Sram. Moving to combat, Pat swings Sram at me, dealing 4 damage, and he gets to find a Plains. With nothing else, he passes to Eric. Eric plays an island for his turn and casts Body Double, which comes into play as a copy of his Empress Galena that he'd pitched the turn before. With nothing else, he passes to Jason. Jason casts Court of Calling for 3 at the end of Eric's turn to find Elvish Archdruid. Before letting the turn pass though, however, I sacrifice 2 Goblin tokens to kill the newly found Archdruid. Jason responds by tapping Well-Wisher to gain 6 life, and moves to his turn. For Jason's turn, during his first main phase, he casts Wood Elves to find a forest. He then drops Seeker of Skybreak and passes to me. For my turn, I play a mountain and cast Goblin Matron to find Grenzo, Havoc Raiser. I then cast the Legendary Goblin and move to combat. I swing 3 tokens and the Beetleback Chief at Eric, since I don't like the idea of him using Galena to steal Krenko. Eric takes the damage and exiles the top 4 cards of his library. I exile a bunch of lands, but noticeably I hit Consecrated Sphinx. But with no mana, however, I have to pass the turn and the cards stay in exile. For Pat's turn, during his first main phase, he casts Stonehewer Giant and moves to combat. He swings Sram at me, hitting me for 4 and getting to find a Plains. With nothing else, he passes turn. Eric plays an island and passes turn. At the end of his turn, Jason uses Fauna Shaman to pitch Dryad Arbor and find Reclamation Sage. Jason then taps Well-Wisher to gain another 7 life. Moving to his turn, Jason plays Deserted Temple for his land drop and casts Reclamation Sage, which enters the battlefield and targets Goblin Bombardment. I respond by sacrificing 2 of my goblins to put 2 damage on the stack, targeting Fauna Shaman. Jason responds by activating Fauna Shaman to pitch Caller of the Claw to find Eternal Witness. Jason then taps Well-Wisher to gain 8 life before letting Fauna Shaman die. With nothing else, Bombardment gets destroyed, and Jason passes turn. For my turn, during my first main phase, I cast Goblin Recruiter, and I get to search my library to find Skirk Prospector, Goblin Ringleader, Sting Scourger, and Goblin Chieftain. I put them on top of my library with Ringleader on top. Moving to combat, Eric promises not to immediately steal my Krenko if I don't attack him this turn, and I agree, swinging at Pat with 3 goblins. Pat chumps the Beetleback Chief with Stonehewer Giant and takes 4. I exile the top 2 cards of his library and cast Sword of War and Peace. At the end of my turn, Eric uses the body-doubled Empress Galena to steal Pat's Sram. With the ability on the stack, Pat targets Sram with Path to Exile, and Eric counters it with Arcane Denial. Unable to exile his commander, Pat has to let Eric steal Sram. Moving to Pat's turn, Pat draws 2 cards on his upkeep, and Eric draws 1. During Pat's first main phase, he decides to reset the board and casts Austere Command, killing all creatures that cost 3 or less, and all enchantments. Jason quickly responds by creating 6 mana with Tree Speaker and his various untappers, and regenerates everything but Ezuri. Moving to combat, Pat swings at Jason with Stonehewer Giant, and responds by tapping the giant to find an attaching Sword of Feast and Famine from his library. Jason takes 6 and is forced to discard Eternal Witness, and Pat gets to untap his lands. Pat then casts Sun Titan during his second main phase, which triggers and brings back Sram, which Pat had let go to his graveyard. Pat then casts Marble Diamond and passes to Eric. Eric plays an island and, like a true blue player, passes turn. Jason casts Elvish Guidance on one of his forests, because let's face it, the one thing that elves struggle with is ramp. Jason then taps the forest and untaps it with Deserted Temple, generating 13 green mana. Jason then casts Ezuri. He levels the Tree Speaker up 4 more times to give all of his elves the ability to tap for 2 green mana. With nothing else, Jason passes to me. For my turn, I cast Goblin Ringleader, which we all knew was my next draw, and grab the 3 remaining goblins off the top. Sadly, the 4th card is Fervor, and I can't keep it, having to put it on the bottom. Uncomfortable with the amount of mana that Jason has, I cast Sting Scourger to bounce Tree Speaker back to Jason's hand. I then pass to Pat. Pat plays Arid Mesa for his land drop, and equips the Sword of the Animist and Skull Clamp onto the Stonehewer Giant. Moving to combat, he swings a Sun Titan at me, which I chump with Sting Scourger and Stonehewer at Jason. Pat gets to bring back Sigarda's Aid with the Sun Titan trigger, and then Pat activates the Giant to find Stratascythe, and then at the same time cracks his Arid Mesa to find a Plains. Pat chooses to exile Plains from his library with the Stratascythe, and forces Jason to take 16, and Jason has to discard Tree Speaker. Pat then gets to untap his lands, and moving to his second main phase, he casts Leonin Shikari, not to be confused with Shakira, and then casts Batterskull, which he gets to equip onto Sun Titan for free thanks to Sigarda's Aid. At the end of his turn, Eric once again steals Pat's Sram, and Jason taps Well-Wisher to gain some life. Eric plays an island for his turn, and casts Clever Impersonator, which comes into play as a copy of Reclamation Sage, and he chooses to target Pat's Sword of Feast and Famine. Moving to his cleanup step, Eric kicks my tripod and passes turn. For Jason's turn, he casts Priest of Titania during his first main phase, and then generates a bunch of mana thanks to his enchantment and Deserted Temple. This lets him activate Ezuri 3 times, giving all of his elves +9/+9 and trample. Moving to combat, Jason swings 52 points worth of damage at Pat. Pat responds by moving Stratascythe from the Giant to the Titan, and blocks Ezuri. Even with all life gain, the amount of elves and damage swinging at him still causes Pat to lose 23 life. For my turn, I cast Ashleen's Prerogative and choose Evens. I then cast Krenko, tapping him to create 2 goblins, and then cast Skirk Prospector because I'm horrible at sequencing. With nothing else, I pass to Pat. For Pat's turn, he plays a Plains and casts Elspeth Knight Tarrant. He then gears up his Sun Titan with the rest of his equipment and moves to combat. During his beginning of combat step, however, Eric casts Cryptic Command, tapping all of Pat's creatures and drawing a card. Pat responds by tapping Stonehewer Giant to find an equipment, and he grabs Sword of Fire and Ice from his library. Pat then makes a soldier with Elspeth in his second main phase to not leave himself completely open, and passes to Eric. Eric plays an island, and moves to steal my Krenko in his first main phase. I sacrifice Krenko to Skirk Prospector, however, because I'd rather he be in the command zone than in the hands of a blue player. Eric then casts Jace the Mind Sculptor, and uses his 0 ability to Brainstorm. With nothing else, he passes to Jason. At the end of Eric's turn, Jason uses Seeker of Skybreak to untap Well-Wisher, which he taps to gain 6 life. He then uses Wirewood Lodge to untap Well-Wisher again, and taps it once more for another 6 life. Jason quickly recasts Ezuri, Renegade Leader, and with the Enchanted Land, Deserted Temple, Priest of Titania, and Wirewood Lodge, is able to generate a staggering amount of mana, which results in 6 activations of Ezuri, giving all of his elves +18/+18 and trample. Jason swings lethal damage at Pat, and the remainder at Eric, leaving back Fintorn elves. Eric responds by bouncing the Well-Wisher and chumps with Sram to prevent 2 of the damage. With nothing else, Jason passes to me. Drawing for my turn, Lady Luck smiles on me, and for my draw step I'm able to find Thornbite Staff off the top. I then recast Krenko and tap him to generate a bunch of goblin tokens, which I sacrifice to Skirk Prospector, giving me enough mana to cast Thornbite Staff. And this essentially allows me to generate as many goblins as I need, thanks to Skirk Prospector, Thornbite Staff, and Krenko. I quickly do so and finish off the board. Game review time. I'm sure some people are going to be disappointed that I won with Krenko through a combo, but unfortunately in a mono red deck, combos are sometimes necessary to win. In a deck like Krenko, if I'm not able to get a really aggressive start, it can often fall behind very easily. Sure, he'd only died once, so it would only cost 6 to recast, but unfortunately that's more mana that I could be using to cast other goblins. I did play quite conservatively, especially considering there was blue and white, which meant that board wipes were definitely going to happen this game. I think it's safe to say that anytime someone pulls out Ezuri, you know that you're going to be going up against an aggro-based quick deck. And Jason's deck certainly lived up to that hype. Some people might have thought that he should have probably spread the love, or at least focused on me a bit more, but facing off against a blue and a white player with the amount of board wipes and bounces that they have, you really have to focus them first and hope for the best. Jason had less to worry about with me because I was playing red, and things like Blasphemous Act are easily negated by Ezuri's Regenerate. I feel like we got a good showing out of Sram, and I really like the commander. He only has 1 white in his cost, he comes out on turn 2, he's got a decent sized body, and he's a draw engine in white. Sure, white can struggle a little bit with ramp, but as you saw, Pat was able to find Sword of Animist early on and keep up with even the green deck. Lastly, Eric's Sakashima deck was really cool. It basically ran only ways to steal or clone other people's stuff, and it's an interesting deck because it allows you to almost be as good as your opponent's decks are. I like how the power level is very dependent on what you're playing against, and it's really cool to see a blue deck that isn't just full of counterspells and draw spells. Please be sure to tune in every Monday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video, with a second video popping up sometime during the week. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta, or check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in part by support from my Patreons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below or in the About section. As always, thank you guys for watching, and please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more.